Yeah, the title's not clickbait here, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, the U.S. Nuclear Weapons Agency did in fact get breached. Now, I love talking about computer cybersecurity. I love talking about crazy hacks, especially when things are out of our control. Because sometimes all you can do in this crazy world is sort of laugh, okay? And that's really all you're able to do right now, ladies and gentlemen. So, for anybody that doesn't know what's been going on, this is the United States Department of Energy. And underneath the Department of Energy is, again, the National Nuclear Security Administration, the NNSA. Now, what is the job of the NNSA? Their core missions, meaning this is literally what they're made for, is to ensure the United States maintains a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear stockpile through the application of unprecedented science, technology, engineering, and manufacturing. So their job is to maintain all of the nuclear weapons that the United States has. Which, for anybody that doesn't know, if you look at the grand list of how many nukes people own, there's really not all that many countries that have nuclear weapons. But the two biggest, the United States and the Russian Federation, I think the Russians have more in number, but the United States has a guarantee that all of the ones that they have can blow up. Now, obviously, you only really need a few nuclear bombs to end humanity. Somehow we've made hundreds upon hundreds to the point where you could end the world several times over, okay? And still have enough nuclear weapons to raise the party even higher. Why would somebody need that many nuclear weapons? To be honest with you, I will let the government answer for that, okay? Because it makes no sense to me. Now, when I read that apparently that they got breached, that's some scary headline. Whoa, the nukes got breached? Now, I want to demystify and, basically cull the misinformation, okay? I'm somebody that knows my fair share about cybersecurity. I know what I need to tell to the audience, that nothing sensitive or nothing classified, no nuclear codes, none of that was actually distributed to the world. So again, just to give you an idea, if you're worried that the bombs are going to be hacked and fly above you, they're most definitely not, okay? To give you a quick idea about how nuclear weapons sort of work, the actual technology behind nuclear weapons and the measures that we have are pretty low-tech, to be honest with you. So first off, a lot of these nuclear weapons are air-gapped, so meaning that they are completely isolated from the actual internet, meaning that no hacker should in theory be able to breach into the computers that run them. Now, the other thing is there are a lot of legacy systems that are still used in nuclear weapons, okay? And that's literally by design. Having things that are low tech makes them ultimately actually less vulnerable to modern methods. So you don't have to really worry. And just to give you a final action over here, there's things like permissive action links, which are actually fail-safe electronic locks. And of course, you need more than one person to fire nuclear weapons, okay? So trust me when I say this, there are a lot of actual safeguards we as human beings have made to prevent ourselves from blowing each other up. And the reason we do it is because we've made nuclear weapons. They can end fucking lives, okay? You gotta be real careful with the nuclear weapons you make. Now, I've known that some people have said, but Muda, I heard they ran nuclear weapons on floppy disks. According to SATS, they've moved to a highly secure solid-state digital storage solution. And highly secure is all you need to hear in this story. So you might be like, well, Muda, if they didn't hack the nuclear weapons, then what did they hack out of the actual nuclear agency? Well, according to the actual nuclear agency, it was really a small number of systems that were impacted. However, this is part of a much larger hack called the Microsoft SharePoint hack or the toolchain hack. And for anybody that doesn't know what's going on here, as of like the last couple days, around 400 institutions were actually hacked internationally, okay? This is a pretty massive hack that's been happening. So one of the chief boys on the actual update over here, some of the chief people from Microsoft, literally did say that there were multiple threat actors, but they assessed that one actor for the early exploitation is a Chinese Nexus threat actor. Now, what is a Nexus threat actor? Well, a Nexus threat actor is somebody that basically is affiliated with the government. Remember, cyber warfare is pretty much legal as long as the government backs you, okay? So whether you're an American NSA hacker Whether you're some Russian hacker, whether you're an Iranian hacker, a Chinese hacker, or a North Korean hacker, ain't no fucking way you're getting extradited for hacking some of the biggest players in the game. But I think we're at a point where maybe it should be considered somewhat of a war crime when you're trying to breach into the nuclear military weapons apparatus of a fucking rival country. So how did this hack actually happen, ladies and gentlemen? Well, through something known as Microsoft SharePoint. Now, for anybody that doesn't know what SharePoint is, to give you a quick understanding of how SharePoint works, is it's basically a content management system and an intranet platform. What an intranet platform is people actually in companies or corporate areas or even locally can make their own internal internet with things like website portals, document management, a lot of collaboration tools. You can make your own local internet, okay, your intranet, if you will, where, again, all of these websites should in theory be accessible internally, or you can use them as part of your big business. So, for instance, if you want to get access to something like SharePoint, for instance, you can go to Microsoft and you can purchase plans as low as $6.80 Canadian per user each month. And of course, some companies go with $17 a user a month. Sometimes, if you want shit like Microsoft's AI, you can pay $40 per user a month. And you might be like, who's willing to do that? Well, in this case, it was a lot of organizations like the United States government, okay? For them, burning money is no fucking problem, okay? It's just ask them to spend $100 million. They fucking will. Now, I want to just stress and say that this wasn't Microsoft actually getting hacked. So there are two key differences here. There is SharePoint Online, which is what we just looked at, where you can go to Microsoft and buy a subscription for a cloud version of SharePoint, or there is on-premise. Now, I want to specifically say the on-premise version actually got hacked. So for anybody that doesn't know the difference, when you go to Microsoft, you can actually download something like SharePoint 2019, and you can download this, install this, and actually try it yourself for like 180 days. They give you a whole user key for it and everything. And you can actually do SharePoint stuff on your local system. So you can run things on your local devices, your local servers, and they never touch Microsoft, okay? It's a locally self-hosted version of SharePoint. Now, again, when it came to the Department of Energy, the nuclear division got hacked with the SharePoint on-premise. So that's why they actually had a limited number of systems. They also had a lot of good cybersecurity practice. So realistically, they were able to snap onto this pretty quickly, capture it, and lock it down and start cleaning it pretty rapidly. A lot of this hack just happened very rapidly across the board. Everyone's kind of just trying to survive it right now. But there are other organizations that got hacked, like the U.S. Education Department, you had Florida's Department of Revenue, and you had plenty of other government systems that got effectively hit. And that is something that is very worrisome. So the actual attack that happened was something that is now categorized as CVE 2025-53770. So this is the deserialization of untrusted data in on-premises SharePoint servers, allowing an unauthorized hacker to execute code over a network. Now that's a lot of nerd speak, but basically what's happening is they were able to use a post request, and using a vulnerability in the SharePoint server, they were able to get SharePoint to process something in an untrusted manner and basically run remote code. Now, if you've ever heard of an RCE, you probably have if you watch my channel with virus investigations and all the cybersecurity shit I talk about. It allows a hacker to run code on somebody's system. And that code could be anything, okay? It could be code that allows them to persist for a long time on a server, move laterally, or grab a whole bunch of information. Remember, the people who are discovering and doing these kind of hacks are some pretty scary types of people. Now, this was given a code of 9.8, which basically means this shit needs to be patched ASAP. That's what that code means. Now, to give you an idea, this was something also known as a 0 day. Now, for anybody that doesn't know what a 0 day is effectively a hack that people have discovered, a lot of malicious guys. In this case, allegedly the Chinese Nexus group, but really it could be anyone. These people discovered a hack. They did not report it to Microsoft. They didn't report it to anybody. They kind of waited until they could use this to basically attack a whole bunch of organizations. So rapidly, this exploit was used against 400 agencies, nuclear group included, and yeah, everyone just kind of faced the whiplash. Now, Microsoft came in, and obviously they released a bunch of patches, which they highly fucking recommend. highly recommend you install them onto your systems, especially if you're running that SharePoint locally. And if you're not running it locally, move that shit into the cloud, as Microsoft would recommend, because the cloud stuff, it's all totally fine. So how did this exploit basically work? And you can actually try this for yourself and sort of lab it out if you want. Basically, you can make 3 different virtual machines and you can grab SharePoint, and provided you don't update it, obviously, to the latest patches, which would mitigate this actual malware, you can kind of examine how this attack would work, in theory. So to give you an idea, that 0 day when it was exploited, and again, it could have been organizations like Linen Typhoon, it could have been Violet Typhoon. So to give you an idea how this kind of works from a technical level is the attacker would send a post request to the endpoint of that on-premise SharePoint server. And that code could look something similar to layout 15 toolpanes aspects display mode edit. Now the trick here is the header for it, the referrer header, should basically be setting to layouts/signout.aspects. So for having a spoofed header, for instance, what SharePoint will do is it will think it comes from a signed out page, and therefore it bypasses, from what I understand, some level of authentication. Now, once you've bypassed a level of authentication, you can send a malicious payload, and it looks something similar to this as a post request. Now, once that is effectively sent to the actual individual at toolpane.aspects, SharePoint deserializes all of that untrusted data in an incredibly insecure manner. That effectively will trigger a remote code execution, and then it allows the hacker to basically do whatever they want. They run the code that they want, and they can do whatever nasty shit that they want to do. Now, obviously, this shit is dangerous because you never need to log into anything. It's completely unauthenticated. And a lot of those hackers, after they've stolen the actual keys involved, can basically remain incredibly stealthy. And again, thankfully, this was only for the on-premise servers. I believe a lot of people still have shit moved up to the online cloud side, which, after today, after what has just happened, yeah, I think a lot more people are going to be paying those subscription fees to Microsoft just to get that just to get off the premise, especially if this kind of stuff exists. Now, luckily, this is a perfect proof of concept made by GotOCVE, all right, where they can actually show you how this stuff kind of works in a more code manner, okay? So they, again, have entire sections where they check if the toolpane ASPX is accessible. They send a malicious web part payload to toolpane.aspects, okay, so you can see layout 15 toolpane aspects, display edit, and yada, yada, yada. But yeah, it's pretty bad, ladies and gentlemen, when, again, this level of attack can happen. Now, thankfully, in a lot of this situation, especially when it came to the nuclear agency, the NNSA, they never had to worry too much because a small amount of those on-premise SharePoint servers were actually hit. And thankfully, nothing classified, nothing super duper sensitive actually ended up getting hacked in here. In fact, from what I understand, the government does primarily use those 365 cloud services as much as they can. So that actually probably was one of the big things that ended up saving them. And again, just having good practice for your cybersecurity is always going to help you down the road. It's one of the things when I've talked about, like, as long as you have things like password managers, your two-factor authentication, then again, I'm speaking for like a very local user. As long as you have good practices on setting that kind of shit up and keeping it maintained, which honestly isn't really all that much work. A lot of it is just what you do initially. You can kind of set and forget in some cases. You literally don't have to worry when everything gets hacked. It's one of the reasons why when we talked about that 16 billion password story, a lot of it was just it was a fucking nothing burger. And second of all, as long as you followed good practices, you literally could just fall back asleep and never worry about your shit, because as long as you practice good things, you're fine. And that's kind of, at a bigger scale, what saved the government. But to me, what's really just scary about this is, like, all these organizations are targeting a lot of critical infrastructure. This isn't the only thing happening to us. Like, I was reading the other week that Singapore was going through a very concentrated level of testing and cyber warfare that's happening against their critical infrastructure. What just scares the shit out of me is obviously how much these things are getting targeted. Because, for the last couple of years, when we looked at things like Colonial Pipeline, SolarWinds, a lot of stuff, a lot of these hacking groups are now going after things that if they hack energy grids, if they hack logistics, if they hack critical infrastructure like communications, it literally could be stuff that can actually cost human lives. Obviously, right? You know, because if you take away people's power, if you take away people's access to resources, if you take away communication, you probably are also impacting things like hospitals, you know, nursing care, a lot of things where, again, these critical infrastructures are literally the thread that holds people's lives in balance. That is the shit that fucking scares me. You know, obviously, thank God that the Department of Energy has kept our nuclear weapons far away from hackers. And thankfully, that will forever be the case. But when it comes to all the other stuff as well, too, a lot of the other organizations that are in here that probably don't have that level of IT support, that level of cybersecurity like cleanliness, that's the shit you have to watch out for, okay? Because ultimately, when the blackouts start happening and the fucking, you know, when the shit really hits the fan, okay, these are the organizations that these scumbags are going to target first. And that's the stuff that freaks me, right? Like in a normal world, this shit should be an act of war, but we live in a society where this stuff just happens and we just keep pointing fingers with nothing like actually being resolved. You know, maybe we as countries have to probably come together and have some level of they call it the what is that what is the UN, the Geneva Conventions, right, for like warfare. Maybe we need to have something updated to prevent each other from like cyber attacking all the time, because ultimately what they're targeting actually has some serious implications. This is not some no nonsense story. We can laugh and be thankful that the nuclear arsenal is safe and sound, but we still should be vigilant and a little cautious about why the fuck all of our critical infrastructure is getting targeted on a day-to-day basis. That shit is scary. Anyways, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. If you learned something, let me know in the comment section below. I am out.